A black CEO quietly slipped back into his own diner just to pick up a sandwich, but he froze when he overheard two cashiers whispering about a rotten scheme right under the nose of the very family he'd built. Can kindness really conquer deceit and injustice? Stick around until the end to witness the heart-pounding twist and learn a lesson about justice, honor, and the true power of a home. Under Houston's late-afternoon sky, the floor-to-ceiling windows of Johnson's Diner reflected a stream of hurried passers-by, neon lights blazing as always. But for Marcus Johnson, none of that glow could chase away the gloom settling in his chest. 15 years ago, he'd started with nothing, mocked as just some black guy daring to dream of owning an American restaurant. Yet today, Johnson's Diner boasted 4 locations across the city, and his name topped lists of Texas's most inspiring entrepreneurs. And still, at the pinnacle of his success, Marcus felt farther from his roots than ever. For months, alarming reports had come in. Abnormally high staff turnover, slipping profits at the flagship spot despite steady crowds, and odd 1-star complaints mixed in with glowing 5-star reviews about the service vibe. Something's rotting from the inside, Marcus thought. That's why today he'd come back, not in his expensive suit, but as his old self. A faded flannel shirt, frayed jeans, a low-slung cap shading half his face, and a scruffy beard no one bothered to notice. He pushed through the familiar door. The bell chimed exactly as it always had, but this time no heads lifted, no smiles, no Mr. Johnson, greeting he'd grown so used to in the early days. His breath mingled with the scent of toasted bread, sizzling bacon, and the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Maybe the mark of a successful boss is that nobody recognizes you anymore, Marcus mused bitterly. Yet deeper down, he felt a cold alienation he couldn't name. He slid onto a stool at the counter, once the spot where he'd sat with employees, hashing out every soup recipe and coffee blend. Now he was here to observe the barely hidden glances between cashiers, the stiff smiles of the servers, furtive looks behind the plexiglass shields. Something felt off. In the rush of footsteps, the inadvertent sigh of a young waitress, the quick, guarded nod of a passing manager. Johnson's Diner used to be family. Staff called him Marcus, and he knew everyone's birthday and every little story. But today, under those neon lights, the place that felt like a second home had become a cold, unfamiliar fortress. Like everyone was bracing for a storm no one dared to name. His first cup of coffee arrived with no eye contact. Marcus forced a wry smile, sipped the bitter brew, and steeled himself for the silent investigation of a CEO who'd become an outsider in the very home he'd built with his blood, sweat, and unwavering resolve. Not rushing his coffee, Marcus let his elbow rest lightly on the counter, his gaze drifting slowly across a space that had once felt both intimate and utterly foreign. All the familiar din was still there. The chef's voice calling orders, the clatter of the register, the chatter of regulars. But beneath that noise hid odd little silences. A server's stifled sigh, furtive glances exchanged, forced smiles that wilted as soon as they appeared. He realized that this happy facade was just fragile makeup masking something rotten inside. A young busser skirted by, clutching a tray, while carefully avoiding the steely gaze of a picky middle-aged couple. In the far corner, the bus girl fumbled more than usual, paling when she dropped a spoon onto the floor. Piece by piece, the shards of that old family atmosphere shattered before Marcus's eyes, reassembling into a stifling, lifeless picture. What caught his attention most wasn't the exhausted youth, though, but a small, stooped figure behind the dish pit. Henry Lawson. The elderly black man's hair was white as cotton, his hands knobby but deft, methodically stacking plates and washing bowls as if nothing else mattered. Every time a customer passed, Henry offered a gentle smile and a nod. Yet the instant he thought no one was watching, he'd rub his back, bend at the waist to catch his breath, his face sagging under the weight of years. Marcus watched a little closer. Henry never complained, even when a filthy tray tipped over, splashing grimy water across his apron. He only smiled and reassured the busgirl. "It's okay, sweetheart. We've all been clumsy." Then he quietly returned to his mountain of dishes. That's when Marcus caught sight of Megan Price, the lead cashier in her early 20s, her blonde hair pulled back neatly, her expression colder than you'd expect behind a service industry smile. She regarded Henry with impatience, then snapped back to the register, lips pressed into an annoyed line. In a single heartbeat, Marcus saw her glance toward Troy Miller, a brown-haired young man of slight build, mischievous eyes brimming with arrogance. Between those two he sensed an unspoken alliance, a subtle conspiracy no long-time owner could ignore. Unlike the rest of the staff, Megan and Troy radiated a quiet hostility, polite on the surface, but rife with whispered asides, disapproving frowns when no guest was watching, inside jokes only they seemed to find funny. Marcus noticed that whenever a customer hesitated over their bill, Megan's eyes would glint with cruelty, while Troy smirked, utterly indifferent to kindness or compassion. It was as if, within this place that had once been a second home, a cold tumor had grown. Arrogance, self-interest, and contempt for someone like Henry. The way his words were cut off, the way people avoided mentioning him, the way Megan sighed with sarcasm every time Henry offered to cover a short payment. All of it felt like tiny cuts eroding the very soul of the diner Marcus had poured his heart into. Lost in these thoughts, Marcus felt his chest grow heavier. He knew, as a black CEO, he'd fought prejudice and worked to create an environment where everyone, regardless of race, age, or background, was respected and equal. Yet, clearly, right here in his own house, darkness in the form of callousness and scheming was creeping in day by day. Tightening his grip on the coffee cup, his eyes never leaving Henry or the loaded look shared by Megan and Troy, Marcus understood that if he only inspected the surface, he'd see nothing but numbers, polite praise, and soulless profit reports. What he needed and wanted was to face the truth, even if it hurt the most. And in that silent moment between light and shadow, Marcus launched a soundless investigation, intent on reclaiming the lost soul of Johnson's Diner, starting with Henry Lawson and exposing the villains lurking behind the register. Every passing moment of observation only sharpened Marcus's awareness of the contrast between Henry and everyone else in the diner. Where the air out front felt rushed, cold, and almost contrived, in the dish pit, Henry's calm was like a door back to the old values Marcus once chased: hard work, patience, humility, and dedication. That frail old black man, bent more with each year but still steady, methodically tackled towering piles of soap-soaked dishes. Whenever a customer or coworker passed by, Henry offered a warm smile and a friendly greeting as if they were lifelong friends. Even the regulars, senior patrons, called him by name, asking about his family, the kids, baseball, and Henry always replied with gentle politeness, unassuming yet deeply warm. It was that quiet perseverance that held Marcus's gaze on Henry. He remembered his own early days, when older mentors like this quietly lifted him up, passing along their patience and resilience to the next generation. So when he heard those whispers behind his back, Marcus felt a sting in his chest. That afternoon, lost in thought, Megan Price's sharp voice cut through his reverie with thinly veiled irritation. "He's so ancient and clings to this place like it's his lifeline. If it were me, I'd have quit ages ago." Troy Miller jumped in with a half-joking sneer. "Yeah, maybe he's got nowhere else to go, so he's stuck here." They laughed under their breath, eyes brimming with contempt for Henry. Marcus looked on, maintaining a serene facade even as each barb pierced him like icy needles. As a black man who'd endured countless subtle slights over race and age, he knew all too well what it felt like to be treated as a roadblock to youthful ambition, especially in a world where prejudice never fully goes away. The more he watched, the clearer it became. Megan and Troy didn't just disrespect Henry, they treated him like dead weight. Every time Henry quietly covered a customer's short payment, Megan shot him a scowl, and Troy turned to whisper snide remarks to his buddy, eyes cold with calculation. Marcus even saw Megan tracking Henry's every move at the register, her lips compressed into a thin, wary line. But it went deeper. During their lunch break, he caught snippets of malicious chatter. "He lives in that rust bucket out back. Who on earth lives like that? Probably scared he'll starve if they fire him. Old guy can't do much but cause trouble." Those offhand jabs, shared only within their little clique, struck at the very heart of the kindness Marcus had worked so hard to build. In the gazes of Megan, Troy, and a handful of younger staff, he saw selfish envy and a shocking lack of respect for a man who'd given so much. Yet Henry never so much as flinched. He simply kept at his work, accepted their stares without protest, never defended himself, never lashed out. That level of forbearance filled Marcus with both admiration and heartbreak. Marcus himself had been taught, silence isn't surrender. It's choosing kindness in a world full of prejudice. Before the lunch rush ended, Marcus witnessed one scene he couldn't shake. A customer accidentally spilled water on a table, and Henry jumped in to mop it up, cracking a joke to break the embarrassment. Behind him, Troy swept nearby, muttering, "He always has to butt in like he owns the place." Megan offered nothing but a dismissive sneer. Marcus furrowed his brow and sighed softly. Under the flickering neon lights and the cooling Houston afternoon, the image of Henry Lawson, the silent sentinel, etched itself even deeper into Marcus's mind. Henry wasn't just another aging employee. He was a living testament to perseverance, quietly upholding the values that once made Johnson's Diner a true home. Yet alongside him, the shadow of scheming and contempt was steadily growing. Marcus knew that to save the soul of his restaurant, he'd have to start by uncovering the truth hidden in the glances and whispers of those who acted as though they owned the world. The image of Henry Lawson, a frail old black man with calloused hands, a stooped back but a warm heart, kept anchoring itself in Marcus's mind like a rare beacon of peace in an increasingly cold diner. But life doesn't allow souls like Henry's to rest for long. At the height of the lunch rush, amid rushing patrons, mingled laughter, and the scent of food, a scene unfolded that Marcus couldn't look away from. Young Mother Amy Turner hurried in with her 2 little ones. She settled at a tucked-away table, her face etched with the exhaustion of shouldering life alone in this pricey city. When it came time to pay, Amy rifled through her pockets, her lips trembling as her coins still came up a few dollars short. Her children, sensing their mother's embarrassment, bowed their heads. The air around the register seemed to collapse into silence. Megan, keeping a practiced, professional smile but with annoyance glinting in her eyes, leaned forward. "Would you like me to remove the dessert? Or maybe—" Amy stammered, I'm sorry. Perhaps I'll skip the drinks for the kids." Just then, Henry appeared like a gentle breeze. With no fanfare, he quietly fished out his wallet, produced a few crumpled bills, and handed them to Megan so no one would feel ashamed. "I've got this. Let the children eat well. Tomorrow will be a better day." Amy's eyes went wide. Before she could decline, Henry offered a kindly grin, as if speaking to an old friend. My wife used to be in that same spot. If my kids went hungry, I wouldn't rest either. Nearby customers who witnessed this exchange smiled softly and said nothing, as though Henry's kindness were simply part of the place. But behind the counter, Megan shot a look at Troy and curled her lip. At this rate, old Henry'll be bankrupt soon. Troy sneered in low tones Marcus could just catch. He doesn't even own a decent house. Pathetic, right? They laughed under their breath, their eyes full of contempt, as if kindness were only for the failures. Marcus froze, gripping his coffee cup until his knuckles turned white. In that moment, every memory of being scorned for his skin color, for his vulnerability, for daring to be kind in a ruthless world, came rushing back like fresh wounds. Behind the polished exterior and power of a CEO, Marcus still carried the ache of someone who'd long stood on society's margins, dismissed for being different. He watched Henry, the tireless worker unaware his compassion was the butt of cruel jokes, and wondered how many more Henrys would be crushed, isolated, turned to stone by these callous values if no one spoke up. Yet Henry simply bent to pat the child's head and reassure Amy that tomorrow will be better, his warmth as gentle as the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Confronted with that quiet kindness, Marcus felt it more clearly than ever. This diner's true heart wasn't in profits or online ratings, but in the small acts of love and forgiveness. And in the next breath, Marcus realized that the darkness he needed to chase out wasn't lurking elsewhere. It was growing right here, in the muted laughs of Megan and Troy, the real villains inside the family of Johnson's diner he had once trusted. Amy Turner's story, and the dejected looks on her children's faces, kept replaying in Marcus's mind even after he stepped away from the register to pour himself another cup of coffee, giving himself a reason to linger. The suffocating weight of the place pressed in on him. A diner that once felt like a home for hard-working people, now mocking genuine kindness as if it were mere decoration. Trusting his instincts, Marcus decided to strike up a conversation with Ron Mitchell, a middle-aged regular who always sat by the window, greeted first, his expression quietly open. As the crowd thinned, Marcus slid into the seat beside him, careful not to reveal his true identity. "Mr. Ron, I've seen you here a lot," Marcus began. "Do you know anything about that older dishwasher, Henry Lawson? He's so kind." Ron narrowed his eyes, then let out a sad smile, shoulders sagging under the weight of memory. "You mean Henry? Everybody here knows him. He's the kindest black man in all of Houston, but life's been anything but kind to him." Marcus listened, intrigued, as Ron took a sip of coffee, his voice gravelly from witnessing so much injustice. 5 years ago, his wife, Linda, got cancer. They sold the house, raided their savings, even pawned their wedding gifts just to keep her alive a little longer. When Linda passed, Henry was left with nothing but that old Buick out back, no home, no place to go. "Why didn't he go live with his kids?" Marcus asked quietly. Ron shook his head, eyes full of pained understanding. "He's got a daughter, Sarah, out in Seattle. She begged him to come home, said she'd help, but Henry's pride wouldn't let him lean on anyone. He said, 'I won't be a burden. I still have work here, and I have my dignity.' Every month he still sends hospital money, sometimes just a few dollars. At first I thought he was foolish, but the more you see it, the more you respect him." Marcus fell silent, fragments of his own childhood surfacing. Being shunned as a black kid in a poor neighborhood, his mother selling everything she had to treat his father, enduring the wealthy's sneers as she did any job she could to feed her children. Stories like Henry's had fueled Marcus's own drive to succeed, so that now he could sit here, not just as an owner, but as someone who truly empathized with people like Henry. He noticed Ron's hand trembling as he spoke, as though carrying both sorrow and pride for a generation of black men who sacrifice in silence. "Most young folks these days don't know how to value someone like him," Ron murmured, nodding toward the counter where Megan and Troy were whispering schemingly. "Henry's the only one who calls me by name," Ron continued. "He checks on me, shares his sandwich when I'm short. People like him are getting rare." Marcus nodded, a fierce resolve welling inside him to shield Henry from the cruel jokes circling the kitchen. He knew what true strength meant for a black entrepreneur. It wasn't the accolades or accomplishments, but standing up for the vulnerable when they needed it most. As he turned back toward the counter, Marcus saw Henry bent over the sink, his back more stooped than that morning yet still masking his weariness. Megan subtly nodded toward him, and Troy shrugged, smirking as if Henry were yesterday's news. But to Marcus, Henry was the very soul of Johnson's Diner, the living reminder of where he came from, and the duty he bore to keep that light alive in the smallest, most overlooked lives. And deep inside, a spark of rebellion flared, heralding an uncompromising confrontation between the values he cherished and the creeping darkness beneath the roof he had built. The moment Marcus stepped back up to the counter, his mind heavy with worry over Henry's fate, he began to notice the odd signs growing ever clearer. Late afternoon light filtered through the windows, neon gleaming over every shadow inside Johnson's Diner. The lunch crowd had thinned, and staff busied themselves wiping down tables for the dinner rush, but the atmosphere between shifts felt thick and tense. Disguised in his humble getup, Marcus had become a silent sentinel, watching every strange movement around him. From his vantage point, he saw Megan Price and Troy Miller growing closer, more like accomplices than co-workers. They'd huddle and whisper whenever they got the chance, casting furtive glances toward the dish pit where Henry still worked quietly. Each time Henry covered a customer's short payment or simply passed through the register area, Megan and Troy would exchange knowing looks, pursed lips, or sly smirks. What began as scattered whispers had clearly morphed into private, coded conversations meant only for the two of them. It wasn't hard for Marcus to catch snippets that sent a chill down his spine. "A few bucks short again today, Meg." "Yeah, let's see if anyone notices this time. If Patricia checks the till, we'll just blame old Henry. He's always lurking around the counter." But the cruelest part was the plotting Marcus heard next. Troy leaned in, voice low. "Next Thursday, my cousin gets laid off. I just need a reason to kick that old man out and we'll score the referral bonus. Split it 50-50? Megan's lip curled as she looked back at Henry. I'm so sick of his holier-than-thou act. Watching him help all these broke customers makes me sick, like everyone's supposed to be some charity case. Just wait, a few more cash shortages, always right when he's near the register, and we'll accidentally catch him in the act. Marcus felt his throat tighten, heart pounding with a blend of anger and humiliation. The same sting he'd known as a kid, blamed for things he didn't do simply for being different, for being black, for being vulnerable. He knew how the poor, the elderly, the powerless can so easily become the perfect scapegoats for someone else's selfish gain. Under the diner's harsh lights, Megan and Troy looked every bit the villains. Megan showed no empathy, only envy and contempt for anyone who chose to live differently, especially someone like Henry, cherished by customers. Troy was coldly practical, willing to push another human being aside for a few extra bucks. Their selfish scheming eclipsed any basic workplace morals. Marcus understood that if no one spoke up, if good people like Henry kept suffering in silence, everything he'd built would be swept away by manipulators and their cruel laughter. All the while, Henry carried on at the sink, unaware that those whispers wove an invisible net set to ensnare him. Marcus tightened his grip on his coffee cup, eyes cold and resolute. He knew it was time to end this farce, because the silence of the righteous only helps evil prevail. And as someone who'd endured injustice and fought not only for himself but for countless black and vulnerable lives, Marcus vowed he wouldn't let Johnson's Diner fall into the hands of the heartless, no matter how painful the fight. Witnessing Megan and Troy's ruthless performance inch ever closer to perfection, Marcus knew he couldn't just stand by any longer. Night fell, and Houston sank into the patchy glow of neon signs and streetlights, but inside, Marcus raged a storm. As the last of the staff filed out of the diner, he lingered patiently, pretending to pore over old receipts. Only when he saw Henry slip quietly out the back door with his battered backpack did Marcus decide to act. He kept just enough distance to follow Henry unnoticed through the scattered rows of cars behind the restaurant. Not everyone would have caught it, but Marcus realized Henry wasn't heading toward the modest apartment block most assumed he'd go to. Instead, he trudged to the far end of the lot, where only darkness, the night wind, and the stale stench of abandoned dumpsters awaited. There, at the edge of the parking area, stood a weather-beaten trailer, its paint peeling, windows crudely taped against drafts, and its roof patched with warped sheets of metal, like someone's forgotten life laid bare. Marcus held his breath, watching from a safe distance as Henry pressed his shoulder against the warped wooden door, struggling until it creaked open. A dim yellow light flickered briefly inside before going out, just enough to reveal a single makeshift sleeping space, a few tattered possessions, and a tiny radio perched beside a faded wedding photo. In that darkness, Henry fumbled for a long moment, as if simply sitting down would unleash every ounce of fatigue he'd buried over the years. And no one but Marcus saw it. This black man, who had spent his life clinging to a shred of dignity, now confined himself inside what was little more than a storage shed for discarded things. The Houston night sky was damp and chill. Marcus stood motionless, overcome by a familiar yet startling sorrow, the same helpless ache of a child huddled with his mother in their rickety corner apartment, gazing up at the opulent homes of others with equal measures of envy and shame. But what haunted him most wasn't Henry's poverty. It was how he hid his pain from the world, even from those who loved him best. It was then that Mr. and Mrs. Lewis, the elderly couple who'd just left the diner, returned upon noticing Marcus still standing in the lot. Seizing a chance to learn more, Marcus greeted them warmly. "Do you happen to know anything about Henry's situation? He seems so alone." Mrs. Lewis, her eyes misting as she glanced toward the trailer, whispered as if afraid the wind might overhear. "Henry's a good hider, sir. His daughter, Sarah, lives all the way in Seattle. She's very successful, and calls to have him move closer so she can help. But Henry insists, 'I don't want to be a burden.' After his wife, Linda, passed away from cancer, he sold everything to pay her bills. All he has left is that car and that trailer. He even sends money to the hospital regularly, just like he promised her before she died." Mr. Lewis continued in a slow, sorrow-laden drawl. "I hear the landowner is selling the lot to a development project. They sent notices a month ago. Everyone there has 2 months to find somewhere new. Renting now costs an arm and a leg. I don't know how Henry'll manage, but he just smiles and says, 'Everything's fine.' Truth is, he just wants to keep working until he can't, so he won't trouble anyone. These fragmented stories cut through Marcus like a knife. He realized that in this corner of the city, a man had spent every last cent on love, clinging to the dignity he had left while hoping never to become anyone's burden, even to his own daughter. Yet it was precisely that quiet pride and solitude that made him a target for schemers like Megan and Troy. Marcus stood in the cold night wind, staring at the trailer's feeble glow. He knew that if Henry lost this last refuge, he'd become truly homeless, a too familiar figure forever forgotten by society. And in that moment, under the dark Houston sky, Marcus Johnson made a decision that would change everything. He would not only expose the villains, but protect Henry from every threat, using every ounce of strength a man who's tasted injustice could muster. The entire night passed fitfully, Marcus haunted by the image of Henry huddled in that ramshackle trailer, and the Lewis couple's stories. By morning, his determination had crystallized into a clear plan. To free Henry, he had to expose the true faces of these villains and make every employee and customer witness just how smoothly evil operates when kindness is used as cover. Early the next morning, Marcus quietly reached out to Jessica Miller, a single mother and longtime diner patron who was now truly struggling after being laid off. He laid out the situation and asked if she'd help orchestrate a test scenario, promising financial support afterward. Jessica agreed. She understood she wasn't acting, but protecting someone good like Henry from a malicious trap. When the clock struck noon, Jessica arrived with her little daughter, dressed simply and looking worn and hesitant. She chose a secluded table and tried to steady her voice as she ordered for herself and her child, casting anxious glances toward Marcus, who sat disguised as just another stranger in the corner. The air at Johnson's diner that lunchtime was unusually tense. Megan's impatience was palpable, as though she were awaiting a scripted moment, while Troy kept darting calculated looks toward the register. Just as Marcus predicted, when Jessica came up to pay, she emptied her wallet and still came up nearly $10 short. She stammered, I'm so sorry. I might have to return my daughter's meal. My card was declined. I really have no other way." At once, Megan shed her polite mask and interrupted in a cold, clipped tone. "We don't give free meals away here, ma'am. If you can't pay, you can wash dishes to cover your tab or remove items from your order." Behind them, Henry, wiping down the counter, rushed forward, concern etched on his face. "Let me help you, Jessica. Everyone struggles sometimes. I'll cover the difference now. You can pay me back another time." He pulled out his wallet and pressed his last bill onto the counter, his voice gentle, without a hint of superiority. Tears welled in Jessica's eyes as she thanked him, and her daughter looked up at Henry like he was a hero. But in that instant, all eyes snapped toward the register, and Megan and Troy sprang into action. Troy called out loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "Patricia, we've got another shortage. I just checked the till. It's almost $10 short again, exactly like the last few times. Funny how it always happens when Mr. Henry's the one who covers for customers." Patricia Collins, the shift manager, frowned in alarm as she recounted the register. "Henry, what's going on here? Why have there been so many cash shortages, and why are they all linked to you?" Megan hovered beside Patricia, feigning concern while tossing in evidence. "I only ever see Henry at the counter when the cash goes missing. I don't want to accuse anyone, but this is really strange." Murmurs rippled through the cafe. Some customers looked sympathetic, others skeptical. A few younger patrons shook their heads in disgust. In many eyes, suspicion and contempt surfaced, as though a mask had been peeled back to reveal a thief. Through their repeated lies, Megan and Troy had turned Henry into the perfect scapegoat. Old, poor, black, at the lowest rung. No one wanted to believe he was innocent. Henry stood frozen, trembling, his gaze clouded with panic. He drew a shuddering breath, struggling to cling to the last shreds of his dignity. I only ever cover customers' shortages. I've never taken a dime from the register. I live on my wages here. I'd be a fool to steal. But his plea was swallowed by the oppressive hush of suspicion. No one stepped forward to defend him. No one challenged Megan or Troy. Patricia sighed and pronounced what felt like a verdict. We'll need to audit every transaction. In the meantime, Henry, you'll have to stop working until this is resolved. If it's a misunderstanding, I'll apologize on behalf of the company, but if not— Henry bowed his head, his frail hands trembling. He said nothing more. He didn't point fingers or mount a defense. He simply looked around. A place he'd called family had become a courtroom, where his kindness was twisted into proof of a crime he never committed. Shame surged up in him like a tidal wave, but still he fought to preserve the last shred of his dignity, though he knew his fate now lay in the hands of cold-hearted colleagues. The diner fell eerily silent, every second stretching out as if frozen in time. All eyes fixed on the register area where Henry Lawson, small of stature and stooped in posture, stood alone, weighed down by the invisible judgments of 3 younger colleagues. On the counter lay Jessica Miller's bill. Her little daughter clutched her mother's shirt, eyes wide with tears. Patricia Collins, the shift manager, faced an impossible situation. Between the streak of cash shortages, the testimonies of Megan Price and Troy Miller, and the pressure to uphold the restaurant's reputation, she felt backed into a corner. Though her heart still believed in Henry's decency, the mounting evidence left her no choice. Patricia tapped her notepad, forcing calm into her voice despite her guilt. Henry, I'm really sorry, but given everything that's happened, I have to ask you to step away from your duties while we investigate. If we prove this was a misunderstanding, I promise I'll apologize on behalf of the company. For now, you can't continue working here. The room went completely still. In that moment, Henry seemed to age 10 years. With trembling hands, he untied his apron and managed a sad smile. The smile of a man who'd endured far too much loss and bitterness, only to be trampled once more for his kindness. He looked Patricia in the eye and spoke softly but clearly, each word falling onto the cold tile floor. I only wanted to help people, Patricia, but if that costs me everything, then I accept it. Some things are worth losing, and I wouldn't regret it. A few longtime patrons wiped tears from their eyes. Those who'd received Henry's help bowed their heads in helpless sorrow. Younger customers, unaware of the full weight of his sacrifices, merely exchanged whispers and sidelong glances, while Megan's eyes sparkled with triumph and Troy smirked, fingers interlaced in a silent victory. Patricia fought back tears, turning away from everyone's gaze. But Megan seized the moment to feign sympathy. I'm sorry for Henry, too, but fairness is fairness, right, Troy? Troy gave a perfunctory nod, his lips curved in a shallow smile, even as his eyes stayed cold. From his seat, posing as an ordinary customer, Marcus watched every gesture and expression. The undercurrent of selfishness, the cold glee of their conspiracy. He felt anew the sting of robbed dignity, the same sting he'd known as a child when he was chased off playgrounds for being that black kid. Now, that indignity blazed fiercer than ever, not only for himself, but for every gentle Henry who was trampled in a place once promised as home. Henry walked out of the diner into the crushing silence, no one dared follow him. A few patrons blinked back tears, reaching out as if to hold him back, but their hands fell empty in quiet regret. In the distance, Megan and Troy leaned in, whispering triumphantly, as though they'd just removed an expendable pawn from their rigged game. Outside, Henry paused and gazed up at Houston's gray sky. He exhaled a long, white breath, heavy with loss, as if his spirit had lost another shred of dignity, another rejection by life. Yet in those silent eyes there lingered a spark of hope. Hope that someone, even just one person, would find the courage to expose this cruelty and restore justice to gentle hearts buried beneath callous laughter and invisible prejudice. The tense hush hadn't lifted by the time the door clicked shut behind Henry Lawson. The diner seemed frozen. Only averted glances, hushed whispers, and the lone figure of a man felled by injustice remained. Then a warm, resonant sound cut through the stifling silence, a bar stool scraping as it was pulled out. Marcus rose, slowly removed his faded cap, and revealed the calm, authoritative face that so many had only read about in the papers. Marcus Johnson, the founder of Johnson's Diner, the renowned black CEO, once a living testament to overcoming poverty, prejudice, and an unfair childhood. His gesture sent a shock through the room. Conversations died on every tongue as people stared, stunned by the presence of a man who had once stood where Henrys, like this one, now did. Without a word to anyone in particular, Marcus strode to the counter, his gaze sweeping over each employee before lingering most on Megan and Troy, whose faces went rigid with exposed guilt. His voice, rich yet icy, filled the diner. I am Marcus Johnson. 15 years ago, I opened Johnson's Diner so that everyone, no matter their age, race, or background, would be treated like family. But today, I must stand here not just as the owner, but as someone who has been crushed for being vulnerable. And I refuse to let that happen here. From his jacket pocket, he produced a small USB drive, holding it aloft. His tone grew firmer. You may not know this, but I installed hidden cameras with audio throughout this diner last week, after reports of cash shortages and sensing something amiss. It's time for the truth to be revealed, for everyone to see. Patricia went pale. Megan and Troy froze, their pretenses shattered. Marcus handed the USB to a technician and pointed to the large TV on the wall. Moments later, crystal clear footage sprang to life. Troy, slipping customers' leftover change into his coat pocket, eyes darting around. Megan, deliberately deleting transactions and adjusting the register's totals as she, conferred with Troy behind a busy Henry. And the most damning, audio of their whispered plot. Just pin it on that old man, then. My cousin starts and we split the bonus. Their vicious words echoed through the stunned diner. No defense remained. Even those who had doubted Henry recoiled in horror and anger. Murmurs swelled into an uproar. People rose, pointed at Megan and Troy, and unleashed scathing rebukes. Patricia Collins buried her face in her hands, tears of shame and regret falling freely. Regulars dashed out to find Henry, beckoning him back. Inside, righteous fury crackled in the air. Henry paused at the threshold, torn between anguish and hope. When he saw the final clip, him quietly covering a cash shortage with his own money, never touching a cent for himself, tears of relief and joy streamed down his weather-beaten face. Marcus stepped forward, laying a firm hand on Henry's shoulder as he addressed the entire diner. I'm sorry you suffered this injustice, but today, in front of everyone, let me make this clear. Henry Lawson is the embodiment of kindness, perseverance, and the true spirit of Johnson's Diner. Applause thundered. Patrons embraced Henry, Megan collapsed in tears. Troy went pale, utterly undone. The truth had been laid bare, and it was Marcus, scarred by prejudice himself, who had restored justice for the vulnerable, wielding the authority, wisdom, and compassion earned through his own battles. But this reckoning was only the beginning. Marcus knew there was still work to be done, not just for Henry, but to steer Johnson's Diner through its most critical turning point in history. The applause hadn't even died down when Marcus stepped forward, his presence that of a seasoned leader. His determined gaze swept across every person in the diner as he motioned for silence. His voice rang out, firm and final. "I'm going to ask everyone to stay in their seats. Today, every truth must be laid bare. No one in this diner is permitted to leave while justice remains unfinished." Tension fell heavy as all eyes focused on Marcus. He pointed directly at Troy Miller and Megan Price, showing no mercy, leaving them no place to hide. "Troy, Megan, you didn't just steal. You conspired together to punish an innocent man who spent his life helping others without asking for anything in return. You tried to destroy not only Henry Lawson's reputation, but his entire life. What you've done is an unforgivable crime." Marcus paused, his expression steely, then continued in a voice rich with feeling. "I'm a black man. I've been driven out of classrooms and denied service in restaurants simply because of my skin. I know the pain of being despised, of being made a scapegoat for someone else's selfishness. But today, I stand here as the CEO of Johnson's Diner to tell you, no one under this roof will ever endure that again. Not one more Henry will be cast to the bottom of society by the lies of those who talk a big game but have no heart." Whispers quieted to complete silence. Regulars young and old felt the shift in the air, not just Henry's story, but a warning to anyone leaning on hidden prejudices or manipulation anywhere. Troy tried to storm off, but two young servers and several older patrons formed a human blockade, their expressions resolute. Megan broke into tears and slunk toward the dark corner of the counter, but it was too late. Marcus glanced toward the entrance. Just then, two uniformed officers walked in, faces grave. Marcus approached them with the file of video footage and audio recordings, giving a concise but thorough explanation. One officer addressed the crowd. "We've reviewed Mr. Johnson's evidence. This matter will be handled transparently." In front of every customer and staff member, the officers placed Troy and Megan under arrest for theft and maliciously framing Henry to exploit his kindness for personal gain. There was no defense. Every lie had been recorded, every scheme exposed. Applause rippled through the diner, tentative at first, then growing into a triumphant roar. Patricia Collins, the shift manager, wept as she approached Henry, grasping his hand in a heartfelt apology. Patrons rose to their feet, passing tissues and making clear that Johnson's Diner would no longer tolerate injustice or deceit. Amid that storm of relief and vindication, Marcus stood beside Henry, his gaze more eloquent than any words. He spoke aloud. "Justice isn't just about punishing the wicked. It's about restoring honor to the wronged. From this day forward, Johnson's Diner won't just serve food. It will safeguard kindness, fairness, and integrity, no matter who faces the test." Tears of joy and gratitude shone in Henry's eyes. For everyone present that afternoon, it was a historic moment. A black man who rose from the bottom dared to stand center stage, reclaim justice for the vulnerable, and revive the true spirit of family. The applause had barely died down when Marcus quietly stepped over beside Henry Lawson. He placed a steady hand on the older man's shoulder, not as an act of pity, but as a profound gesture of respect. That firm grip seemed to melt away years of chill and indignity for Henry. After the last customers trickled out, Marcus invited Henry into the office at the back, somewhere Henry had never dared enter except as the dishwasher. The lights were soft, the door closed behind them. 2 men, 2 generations, 2 lives marked by injustice and loneliness, now stood together in shared understanding. Marcus began with a heartfelt apology, his voice catching. "Henry, I let you suffer that unfair ordeal. I left the roots of Johnson's Diner to wither, and that was my fault. But today, I promise you, no one here will ever be treated like that again." Henry tried to speak but only choked on a sob. Marcus gently pushed a folder in a thick envelope toward him. "I've been thinking about everything you've done for the last 7 years. You're more than a dishwasher. You're the true soul of this place, the one who kept our hearts kind through every storm. So, starting today, I want you to be our customer service manager. You'll oversee shifts, train new staff in caring service, gather guest feedback, and above all, keep the spirit of Johnson's Diner burning bright. Your salary will double, you'll have full health coverage, and we'll cut your hours so you can finally rest." Henry froze, eyes wide, as though he couldn't believe it. Marcus smiled and continued, each word brimming with resolve. "I've also paid off every last medical bill from Linda's treatment. And here," he laid a stack of papers on the desk, "are the deeds to that little house on Springview Drive. It's not huge, but it's warm, close to work, and you'll never have to sleep in that trailer again." Henry sat speechless for a moment. Then his trembling hands flipped through the documents as if afraid they weren't real. When the truth set in, his legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees in tears, whispering over and over, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." He clutched Marcus's hand as though he'd finally reached solid ground after a lifetime of storms. But Marcus wouldn't let him stay down. He knelt, lifted Henry to his feet, and squeezed his hand, eyes warm yet determined. "You don't need to thank me. You are the soul of this place. Your kindness made Johnson's Diner a real family. All I ask is that you stay, keep our fire burning, and remind us every day why this diner exists." Then Marcus took out his phone and called Sarah Lawson in Seattle, so Henry could finally speak honestly with his daughter. For the first time in years, Henry shared the truth of his struggles, his loneliness, and the joy of being vindicated at last. Sarah sobbed on the line, promising to visit as soon as she could, and apologizing for all the times she'd called only to hear, "I'm fine, sweetheart." For Henry, it was a moment of rebirth, a return to life's true meaning, not just in material security, but in restored dignity, family love, and the complete revival of his spirit. For Marcus, it marked the beginning of a new journey, a promise that, from this day forward, no one under this roof would ever have to fall into darkness again. Good news of Henry Lawson's return, his exoneration and promotion, spread like wildfire through Johnson's Diner and the entire neighborhood. The very next morning, when Henry walked in wearing his new manager's uniform, the atmosphere felt completely transformed. Warm, welcoming, bursting with smiles and firm handshakes. Old and new staff alike gathered around him, some patting his shoulder while others recalled fond memories. The time he quietly bought breakfast for coworkers after their hours were cut, or the time he comforted a crying busboy who'd been scolded by a customer. Marcus Johnson chose that morning to address every employee, every patron, and even the local press, declaring a brand new beginning, a fairness policy unprecedented in Johnson's Diner's history. Grasping the microphone with a steady, hopeful gaze, he said, I once promised myself I'd make this place a true home. But I let a few people shake that foundation. Starting today, every Johnson's Diner employee, regardless of age, background, or skin color, will earn a living wage, receive comprehensive health insurance, have access to an emergency relief fund in times of crisis, and be supported both materially and emotionally. No one will be left behind, and no one will ever have to fear adversity or temporary hardship. Thunderous applause rolled through the diner, not just from staff but from patrons who'd been helped by Henry over the years. Marcus's voice deepened with conviction as he continued, "I'm also proud to announce the creation of the Henry Lawson Fund. This fund will assist employees, customers, or anyone connected to Johnson's Diner who faces tragedy, whether illness, natural disaster, or any of life's challenges. It will also forgive meal debts, help underprivileged students pursue their education, and build a community that every one of us can be proud to call family." Henry stood speechless, trembling, his face a mix of joy and overwhelming emotion. Customers eagerly shared stories of his kindness. The time he gave a stranded commuter bus fare, the Christmas Eve he packed a warm meal for a family in need, and the children, now grown, who returned to embrace the old dishwasher they'd known as family. Patricia Collins, the manager who'd once signed Henry's suspension, stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "You're no longer the quiet man in the back, Henry. You're our manager, our inspiration, and the shining example we're most proud of." Marcus nodded solemnly, emphasizing for everyone's sake, "These policies aren't rewards. They're the justice you all should have had long ago. From Henry, I learned that true success is rooted in kindness, patience, and courage." In that moment, any trace of prejudice, envy, or fear vanished from the diner. In its place was faith, hope, and the genuine connection of a community that refuses to stay silent, that owns up to its mistakes, and that stands up for even the smallest acts of goodness. At the center of it all, Henry could only nod through tears, embracing each co-worker and former customer. The darkness of the past had truly been driven away, thanks to the bravery of an owner scarred by bias, the power of quiet compassion, and an unbreakable belief in a home where no one is ever left behind. That morning, when Henry Lawson walked into Johnson's Diner wearing his new manager's uniform, no one recognized the frail, humble dishwasher he once was. The whole place buzzed with energy. A long line of customers queued outside, not just for breakfast, but to congratulate Henry, to wrap him in hugs like family. Kids who once received cookies and free meals from him now ran up to tackle Uncle Henry in a bear hug, no longer just the quiet man behind the kitchen wall of suds, but the very embodiment of kindness and the diner's guardian in the neighborhood's eyes. Elderly patrons who quietly slipped him a few spare bills in gratitude were now led by Henry himself to the best seats, offered assistance from the Henry Lawson Fund, and given a rare sense of security in a harsh world. Soon, those in need, people facing poverty, homelessness, or struggling students, began to gravitate to Johnson's Diner. Here, they didn't just get a hot meal, they received respect, a listening ear, and a promise of ongoing support. No one feared scorn or shame if they came up short. Henry's example showed them that second chances truly exist. True to his word, Marcus Johnson started appearing in the diner far more often, no longer the distant CEO poring over reports from afar. He sat with the morning shift, chatted with every team member, solicited feedback, and personally resolved even the smallest issues. He hosted open forums where anyone could share ideas, ask questions, or recount fond memories of their home away from home. Marcus's presence didn't just fill the staff with pride, it gave them a sense of protection. an undeniable sign that their leader listened and learned from his mistakes. Patricia Collins, the very manager who once signed Henry's suspension, had become Marcus's right hand in reshaping hiring. We no longer recruit based on age, race, or resume alone. We choose people who know how to show respect, practice compassion, and stand up for what's right. From policy to practice, Johnson's Diner transformed into the place where those once shunned elsewhere could reclaim their dignity and trust in themselves and in society. Word of the diner's fairness and its people-first model spread beyond Houston, even out of state. Chefs and restaurant managers came to study, snapping photos with Henry and Marcus, and hearing the story of the dishwasher-turned-manager. Media outlets hailed Johnson's Diner as the restaurant of kindness and second chances, a place that transcends barriers of race, age, background, or past mistakes. Social organizations and local schools began sending students to intern there, learning how to run a business rooted in human values rather than mere achievements. Henry's story was no longer his alone or the tale of a small diner. It became a beacon of hope, tolerance, and belief in change. Every evening, as Henry locked up, his eyes shone not with sorrow but with pride. He knew this place had become more than just his livelihood. It was a true home, where kindness is heard, and those once pushed to society's margins can step into the light with their heads held high. And so, after one fierce storm, Johnson's Diner truly sprang back to life, reborn as a real family, not by title, but through the living warmth of compassion flowing from its humblest members. As Johnson's Diner gradually returned to its true family spirit, the storm seemed to have passed, but its echoes still reverberated through the community and the entire service industry. The story of Megan and Troy, once convinced their cunning and scheming would trump all ethics, became a powerful wake-up call for restaurant workers everywhere. Posters declaring, "Cleverness isn't character," began appearing in training sessions across Houston, complete with stills from the hearing at Johnson's Diner itself. No one now speaks of Megan and Troy as mere villains or outcasts. They stand as living examples of the cost of betraying trust, of choosing selfishness over kindness. Managers and owners from other restaurants have come to Johnson's Diner to see it for themselves, to ask Henry questions, to hear Marcus Johnson's advice firsthand. They tell their staff, "Here, fairness isn't just talked about, it's lived, protected, and wrongdoing is promptly punished." After everything, Johnson's Diner had returned to its humble yet proud beginnings, a home for anyone once left behind, regardless of skin color, wealth, or status, welcoming those who felt they'd nowhere else to turn. Anyone, from the shy new server to a reformed ex-offender, from a single mother to a retired grandfather, was recognized, heard, and respected. Henry Lawson now lives in a warm, new home, no longer the gaunt man sleeping in a battered trailer, but a model of compassion and resilience, proof that you can preserve your dignity and kindness even when life seems against you. He inspires not just the staff but the whole neighborhood, helping those in need, mediating small conflicts, and reminding younger coworkers that, above all, service is about sowing hope and spreading kindness every single day. For Marcus Johnson, the journey from a black boy driven out of classrooms and looked down upon in a poor Houston neighborhood to the CEO who founded Johnson's Diner found its true purpose: to make sure no one is ever pushed to the margins, and that injustice and prejudice never erase the light of kindness and courage. He is no longer just a symbol of personal success, but the embodiment of fairness, collective strength, and compassion. In the days that followed, whenever Marcus sat by the diner window, listening to children's laughter and seeing customers of every race and generation enjoying each other's company, He realized that Johnson's Diner's real value wasn't in revenue, reputation, or awards, but in every heartfelt hug, every tear of relief, every simple thank you from someone who thought they'd lost hope. Kindness knows no color, age, or title. It is the healing power that unites every soul, transcending prejudice and injustice. Only by having the courage to protect, nurture, and spread it can you truly be a leader, a person who creates a real home for everyone. Johnson's Diner has done just that, and from now on, no one will ever be left behind. If you love uplifting, meaningful stories of resilience, justice, and compassion, please like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe so you never miss another inspiring story. We deeply appreciate every view and every moment you spend with us as we spread the best of humanity.